Hey guys, tonight we journey to a place where the wind never stops and the horizon seems to go on forever. You're standing on the high steppes of Mongolia, boots half sunk in dry grass, the sun just slipping behind a purple ridge of distant hills. Around you, the land hums with the kind of silence that only ancient places can hold. And there, rising like stone sentinels out of the earth, are tall, narrow slabs, deer stones, they call them. No one knows exactly who carved them. No one knows precisely why. And if you hang around long enough, well, you might find out. But also, you might not survive the cold. Just saying. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're all tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take your first step across the wide Mongolian plain, and the first thing that hits you is the wind. It's not a breeze, it's a full personality. Dry, constant, nudging at your clothes like it's trying to guide you somewhere. The grass rustles low, and in the distance, dark shapes rise from the land like forgotten gravestones. You trudge closer, and the shapes become clearer, tall stone monoliths, carved with swirling designs and elegant deer in full leap. These are the deer stones. There are hundreds scattered across northern Mongolia and southern Siberia, usually found near burial mounds called kiriksurs, which are basically Bronze Age cemeteries, minus the creepy angels and plastic flowers. Some of these stones are taller than you, others barely waist high, but all share one thing in common: the delicate, mysterious carvings that snake across their surface. Some look like belts, others like weapons, and almost all of them feature a deer mid-flight, limbs stretched, antlers flowing like ribbons, sometimes floating above the body like they forgot gravity was a thing. You reach out to touch one of the stones, and it's cool under your fingers. Rough, etched with time and wind and, maybe, intention. Some locals believe these stones hold the spirits of ancient warriors. Others think they're celestial markers, designed to track the stars and guide souls into the afterlife. There's even one theory that suggests they're ancient warning signs. Like, beware, step demons ahead. Okay, maybe not exactly, but close. The area around the stones is oddly quiet. No birds. No bugs. Just that whispering wind and the occasional flicker of movement in the distance, probably a goat. Hopefully. You sit down in the grass, eye level now with a stone that's been standing here for at least 3,000 years. The carvings seem to shimmer in the changing light. It's not hard to imagine a Bronze Age artisan chiseling away at it, squinting against the same wind, trying to tell a story that could last beyond death. Historians argue, often, loudly, about when these stones were made. Most date them to around 1000 BCE, during the late Bronze Age. But no one really agrees who made them. The Sokha. The Scythians. A mysterious pre-Scythian culture that just vanished into the dust. Take your pick. There's no Rosetta Stone for deer monoliths. Unfortunately, one scholar proposed that the stones mark the graves of elite warriors, a sort of prehistoric headstone meets astrologer chart combo. It's not a bad theory. Many of the stones do stand near burial mounds filled with horse skeletons and bronze weapons. But another camp insists these weren't gravestones at all, they were sky markers. Ancient calendars, tracking the movement of the stars. And still others say, nope, wrong again, they were shamanic tools, helping spiritual leaders navigate the upper worlds. Or maybe the lower ones. Or both. The truth is, nobody knows. And that's part of the magic. You lie back in the grass, the stone rising beside you, and look up. The sky stretches wide, unbroken by buildings or billboards. The clouds are high and thin. The stars are already beginning to blink into view, and you wonder, did the people who carved this stone see the same constellations you do? Did they name them? Pray to them? Argue about whether that star cluster looks more like a goat or a bowl? Here's a quirky tidbit for your consideration. The antlers carved into the stones often resemble branches, or flames, flowing upward in ways that make no anatomical sense for real deer. But maybe that's the point. Maybe they weren't real deer at all. but celestial ones, spirit animals leaping through the cosmos. Some archaeologists call them flying deer, or even solar deer. Others prefer not to get poetic and just say, well, it's a stylized cervid. Next. Still, standing here, you can feel a strange alignment between sky and stone. Like the air remembers something you don't. That eerie harmony, the kind that makes you check over your shoulder, just in case something, or someone, is watching. It's not frightening, exactly. Just ancient. Deep time ancient. And being here, tracing your fingers along the carvings, you feel like you've entered a conversation that's been going on for millennia. You won't understand the words, of course. But you're listening. And that matters. As the light fades and the stars sharpen, you rise slowly, brushing grass from your jacket. There's more to explore. More stones to puzzle over. More theories to silently mock or secretly adopt, because the dear stones aren't done talking. Not yet. You keep walking. The ground crunches beneath your boots, dry pebbles, crisp grass, maybe a bone or two from a very unlucky marmot. The wind hasn't let up. It never does out here. And the stones. They keep coming. Some clustered together, like a herd frozen mid-stampede. Others stand alone, solitary and stubborn, like they didn't get the group memo. Eventually, you notice something else. The stones aren't randomly scattered. No, they are positioned with care, usually near low mounds ringed by stone circles. These are the kyrixors, ancient burial sites that make modern cemeteries look like food court seating. Flat, sprawling, and eerily symmetrical, they radiate low stone arms in cross-like patterns, some stretching up to 100 meters long. You start to wonder, did these serve as celestial maps? Processional paths? Giant cosmic dartboards? Historians aren't totally sure. Surprise, surprise, but they do know this. The kyrixors almost always contain horse remains. Not just one or two, but dozens. Sometimes hundreds. Whole skeletons carefully laid out, as if in death, the horses were honored alongside their humans, or maybe sent ahead as spiritual chauffeurs. It's believed that a person buried here was likely pretty important. A tribal chief, a revered shaman, or someone who owned a lot of horses, and had the clout to have them sacrificed in bulk. Your pet goldfish did not get that kind of funeral. As you step closer to one of the kyrixors, you notice the layout isn't just ceremonial, it's mathematical. The placement of the stones, the orientation of the arms, even the surrounding deer stones, all suggest a deep understanding of geometry and space. Not the kind you'd use to ace your SATs, but the kind you might need to align your burial with the movement of the stars. Think prehistoric feng shui, except instead of worrying about your energy flow, you're planning your exit strategy for the afterlife. The main theory goes like this. The deer stones marked individuals, and the kyrixors marked collective memory. One person gets a stone. A tribe gets the mound. But then again, maybe that's totally wrong. Some deer stones aren't associated with any burial mounds at all. They just stand alone, miles from anything, like some cosmic prank. Scholars call those orphan stones. Poetic, isn't it? Also tragic. No one wants to be the forgotten gravestone. Here's where things get weirder. Some deer stones seem to have been moved from their original locations, dragged across miles of steppe, re-erected near new burial sites. Why? Was it reuse? Was it homage? Or were people just running low on good granite? You imagine an ancient conversation going something like, "Hey, didn't that stone used to be near Uncle Beta's grave?" "Yeah, but this one's closer to the camp, and it's got a better deer." More leap. True. That is a top-tier leap. The more you explore, the more connections start to form. You see a pattern, deer stones clustered around elite burial sites, facing similar directions, etched with similar symbols. Belts across the middle. Sun-like discs on top. Carvings of daggers and bows. You don't need to be Indiana Jones to recognize a theme. This isn't just random artistry. It's iconography. And maybe, just maybe, it's meant to map the journey from life to afterlife. With the sky as your final destination, you sit beside another mound, watching the shadows stretch across the steppe. You can almost picture the burial rituals, drums beating in rhythm with the wind, lines of mourners dressed in furs and bronze, leading horses by the reins. Then, with solemn ceremony, the dead are laid to rest, accompanied by weapons, ornaments, and sacred animals. The deer stone is raised. Eyes lift to the sky, and somewhere in the middle of all this, a question lingers. Were the people who built these mounds astronomers? Priests? Artists? Maybe all three. Or maybe none of the above, and we're just projecting modern job titles onto people who had entirely different categories for knowing the world. Here's a fringe theory for your consideration, brace yourself. Some believe the stones were alien communication devices. Yep. Star maps for the stars. The swirling deer. Stylized spacecraft. The carved belts. Cosmic coordinates. And those sun disks. Spaceports. Are you rolling your eyes? Good. But also, admit it. A tiny part of you wants it to be true. Just a little. Still, you don't need aliens to find mystery here. Because even the simplest explanation, marking the resting place of someone deeply loved or deeply feared, carries its own quiet weight. These stones aren't just markers. They are messages. Stories carved in silence, meant to last longer than language. As twilight deepens, the kyrixors begin to disappear into shadow, but the deer stones seem to glow faintly in the fading light. Maybe it's the angle of the sun. Maybe it's your imagination. Or maybe they've been doing this a long, long time, catching the last light of day to guide souls on their journey skyward. You breathe in cold, clean air. And for a moment, the past doesn't feel so far away. It's just quieter. You're starting to see a pattern, even if your brain hasn't quite caught up to it yet. The more deer stones you pass, the more the carvings begin to speak, not in words, but in repetition. Deer. Belts. Discs. Weapons. Always the same motifs, like someone kept copying the same visual to-do list. And you're tempted to dismiss them as stylized decoration. But then again, prehistoric people didn't just doodle on granite for the fun of it. Granite isn't exactly a forgiving medium. You crouch in front of one of the more elaborate stones, running your hand over a smooth band etched across the middle. It wraps the stone's waist like a belt. Below it, a carved dagger points downward. Above, a sun-like disk beams out rays in every direction, and of course, there's the deer. Leaping again. Always leaping. Some experts believe these belts were more than just fashion statements. They might represent real warrior gear, status symbols carved into stone. Others argue they're symbolic markers for rank or role in the tribe. And some, of course, go full galaxy brain and suggest these belts align with the celestial equator, marking a boundary between the earthly and the cosmic. Because why not turn your funeral monument into a personalized star chart? Historians still debate whether these carvings had a purely ornamental purpose, or if they served as a kind of proto-calendar. You tilt your head. The belt does seem to divide the stone in perfect proportion. Some scholars claim that's no accident, that it may reflect a cosmological order, a division between worlds, underworld below, earthly life in the middle, sky realm above. It's sort of like an ancient infographic, but without the pastel color scheme. Here's where it gets extra spicy. Some carvings include circular shapes near the top that look suspiciously like suns, or maybe moons. Others look like constellations, if you squint. And more than one academic has insisted that these arrangements must correspond to the night sky, particularly to Orion, the Pleiades, or the Milky Way. You lean back, staring up at the real thing. Tonight the stars are sharp, cold, and shockingly bright. The Milky Way cuts the sky like spilled salt. You wonder, if you match the carvings on the stones to the stars overhead, would they line up? Would the deer be leaping across Orion's belt? Would the daggers point to a certain season? A solstice? A sacred moment? Some archaeologists tried that, digitally mapping the deer stones and their orientations, hoping for a celestial matchup. Results: mixed. Some alignments seem suspiciously on purpose. Others, not so much. But that doesn't mean the stones weren't intended to reflect the sky. It might just mean we're missing the Bronze Age decoder ring. Now here's a quirky little gem. In one rare find, the reindeer's antlers weren't just antlers, they were shaped like trees. Specifically, the world tree motif seen in many ancient cultures, where branches reach the heavens and roots plunge into the underworld. Suddenly, this isn't just a deer, it's a cosmic taxi with branches growing out of its head. A metaphysical Uber XL, if you will, and speaking of metaphors, some think the deer itself isn't just decoration, it's a psychopomp. No, that's not an insult. It's a term for a creature that guides souls to the afterlife. You've heard of ravens and jackals in that role, but deer? That's new. But it fits. Swift, silent, ethereal. If you had to pick an animal to escort your spirit through the stars, you could do worse. Now, not everyone agrees the carvings are sky maps. Some say they were just personal biographies. Picture a Bronze Age guy saying, "I want a deer, my belt with the bronze buckle, and my ceremonial axe. Oh, and can you make it look heroic?" Kind of like a prehistoric LinkedIn profile, but chiseled into rock. Still, you can't shake the feeling that there's more to these patterns. You've seen a lot of repetition in human history, but rarely does it feel this deliberate. The same symbols appear across hundreds of kilometers. Some nearly identical. And yet there's just enough variation to suggest individual hands, different artists following the same blueprint. One theory, still hotly contested, is that these carvings represent astronomical timekeeping. The discs might show solar positions, while the deer track seasonal migrations, both of animals and stars. It's not hard to imagine a culture so intertwined with nature that they watched both the sky and the herds with equal reverence. Your smart calendar reminds you about dental appointments. There's reminded them when to bury the dead and honor the ancestors. You take out your flashlight, not for light, but to rake it across the surface of another stone. The angled beam highlights the depth of the carvings. Some are deep and confident, others barely scratched, worn by wind or perhaps hesitation. It's easy to forget that these weren't mass-produced, they were carved by hand, probably over weeks. Possibly while muttering about how someone else should be doing this. Why do I have to carve the sacred deer again, Beta? The detail is astonishing. Some deer even have exaggerated features, spiraling antlers, elongated limbs, tails like flames. And always in motion. You've never seen a single static deer. These creatures are caught mid-leap, heads turned slightly skyward, like they've spotted something just out of frame. A star. A soul. A really big patch of moss. It's poetic, really. These stones aren't shouting for attention. They whisper. And like all good mysteries, they don't offer answers, just better questions. You sit back again, hands chilled, mind warmed. The sky above you and the carvings beside you begin to blur in the low light, reflections of each other. Maybe that was the point all along. Maybe the deer stones aren't maps of the stars, but maps for the soul, pointing the way home. You wake up early, if you even slept at all. The kind of half-sleep that happens when the wind won't stop whispering and the stars are too loud. You sit up, stretch, and glance around. The deer stones haven't moved, but they somehow look different in morning light. More rigid. Less mystical. Like ancient librarians watching you over the tops of their spectacles, you shake off the chill and start walking again, tracing an invisible thread between one stone and the next. Somewhere along the trail, it hits you, these weren't made by sedentary folk. No city dwellers with pottery kilns and permanent addresses. These stones belong to people who moved. People who rode across the steppes on horseback. Or more accurately, before horseback riding even became a thing, they probably walked or led herds. These were early nomads, and they had places to be. Historians often associate the creators of the deer stones with a culture loosely referred to as early Bronze Age steppe herders, though loosely is doing a lot of work there. These people left no written records, only stone and bone. But from what little survives, metal tools, burial patterns, horse remains, we know they weren't primitive. They had advanced metallurgy, complex spiritual systems, and, clearly, an eye for dramatic stone art. Nomadic life wasn't some chaotic wandering. It had rhythm, seasonal migrations, established pasture routes, and deep, inherited knowledge of the land. And more importantly, the sky. Because when you don't have buildings to block your view, the sky becomes your best friend, and your only calendar. That's where the deer stones come in. Some believe they marked migration routes or seasonal campsites. Others argue they served as celestial signposts, helping nomads orient themselves across the vast, featureless plains. There's a theory, again, hotly contested, that the layout of certain stones mirrors star positions during solstices. Or perhaps they track the movement of the sun deer, a mythical creature said to pull the sun across the sky. Yes, that's a thing. And honestly, not the worst mascot. Here's your quirky tidbit of the day. Some archaeological digs have unearthed bronze mirrors near these burial sites. That's right. Mirrors. In the Bronze Age. Some say they were used for rituals, others for signaling across long distances. A few bold researchers even suggest they were astronomical tools, used to reflect sunlight, track shadows, or, in one hilarious theory, to communicate with sky spirits. Can you imagine being that spirit, just vibing in the cosmos when someone starts Morse coding at you with a shiny disk? But back to our nomads. These people weren't living in isolation. Recent discoveries show that they traded across vast regions. Jade from far-off China. Beads from Central Asia. Metal goods from places hundreds of miles away. Which means these weren't backwater wanderers, they were part of a network. A mobile, sophisticated, and maybe even fashion-forward network. Those belts on the deer stones weren't just for flair, after all. And yes, historians are still locked in a scholarly cage match about which specific group deserves credit for the deer stones. Some claim the Sokha, or Proto-Turkic peoples, others suggest a shadowy culture that predated both. But here's the twist, they may have all contributed. Cultures blend, especially on trade routes. Maybe the stones are a kind of collaborative ancient art project, centuries in the making, shaped by evolving beliefs and aesthetic tastes. Now, this might make your inner minimalist weep, but there's nothing uniform about the deer stones. They vary wildly in detail, style, and scale. Some are simple and rough, like someone started carving and gave up halfway through. Others are so finely etched you can see muscle lines on the deer. Historians see this as an evolution, early attempts eventually refining into a symbolic language that later artisans mastered. You're just trying to figure out which deer looks the most aerodynamic. And then there's the mystery of the direction. Most deer stones face east, toward the rising sun. Coincidence? Probably not. Some interpret this as rebirth symbolism, the soul following the sun into the next life. Others suggest a more practical reason, align with the sun and you'll always know where you are. Kind of like a Bronze Age compass, but you can't fit it in your pocket. And it won't help with parking. You crouch beside a particularly weathered stone. Time has softened its lines, but the deer is still there, leaping upward, like it knows something you don't. You reach out and press your palm to its side. Cold. Smooth. And, somehow, vibrating with something that might just be memory. It's humbling to realize how far these nomads traveled. Across plains, over mountains, through river valleys. Carrying stories, rituals, entire belief systems, on foot or horseback. They didn't need cathedrals. They had the sky. And the deer stones. Those were their altars, their libraries, their billboards to eternity. And then, just to keep things spicy, here's a little-known fact. One excavation in northern Mongolia revealed a burial site with bronze cauldrons, which some researchers think were used in ritual feasts. Maybe even involving fermented mare's milk. You're welcome for that image. Picture a wake where everyone drinks slightly off yogurt out of a metal bowl, while a stone deer stares them down. You get the sense that everything out here, the mounds, the stones, even the empty spaces between, was part of a system. A code. A living relationship with the landscape that modern life has mostly forgotten. You step back from the mound, feeling like you've just read a few lines of a book in a language no one speaks anymore, but that still manages to stir something in your gut. Above you, a hawk wheels through the pale blue morning, tracing a wide, lazy spiral. Maybe it knows something too. You keep walking. The stones are calling again. You're several hours, and several kilometers, into your walk now. The sun is climbing, but it's still not what you'd call warm. Out here, the steppe tricks you. The sky looks like an open invitation, but the wind is a slap in the face. Still, you trudge forward. The land rolls gently, sometimes hiding the stones until you're nearly on top of them, and that's when you notice something odd. Some deer stones, despite their size, all seem to point in a strangely deliberate way. Not randomly plopped down, like someone was having a rock decorating afternoon. They face something. And not just anything, they often point east, or slightly northeast, toward the rising sun. Or, according to some researchers with star charts and too much free time, toward Orion's belt. You stop. Look up. It's daytime, but you know exactly where Orion is supposed to be. That trio of stars in a perfect diagonal line, you've seen them before, especially in winter skies. It turns out that across several ancient cultures, from Egypt to Central America to, apparently, Mongolia, Orion held a weirdly consistent kind of reverence. A cosmic celebrity, if you will. And here, some think the deer stone's orientation toward those stars isn't a coincidence. Could they be tracking Orion's rise? Marking the season of a hunt? Or perhaps aligning with some myth we've lost, where the deer leap not through the sky, but to it, chasing the stars themselves. Of course, historians still argue whether these alignments were intentional, symbolic, or just the result of a guy saying, "Hey, this way looks nice." But you can't help noticing that too many stones seem to know exactly where they are facing. It's like they're looking for something, staring into the distance, waiting for something to return, and here's where things get delightfully mystical. There's an idea, especially among those who lean into oral traditions and indigenous cosmologies, that stars were ancestors. Not metaphorically. Literally. When a great person died, their soul joined the stars. And the deer stones. They were like celestial launch pads. Think less memorial and more spiritual catapult. You stand beside one of the taller stones, squinting at the carved deer. It's positioned high, like it's already halfway through its jump. Above it, the familiar disk, possibly a sun, possibly a star, possibly the cosmic equivalent of a QR code. The deer is oriented just so, almost like it's bounding up the stone itself, and then it clicks. What if the stone isn't just symbolic? What if it's a ladder? A spiritual trajectory? Earth at the base, the sky at the top. Belt in the middle, marking the transition. A dagger to cut earthly ties. A deer to guide the soul skyward. It sounds poetic, because it is. But maybe the people who made these were more poetic than we give them credit for. Just because they didn't invent the smartphone, doesn't mean they weren't obsessed with the stars. Here's your quirky footnote for this leg of the journey. In some modern Mongolian folktales, deer are said to have once lived in the sky, but were sent down to earth as a gift to humans. But if they disrespected the deer, overhunted them, ignored rituals, the deer would return to the stars, taking prosperity with them. Which kind of makes you wonder, were these stones a sort of apology? A promise? We're still watching the skies, we swear, kind of gesture. You sit for a moment on a low rock, shielding your eyes against the wind. Your brain starting to spiral in all directions, because the more you learn, the less certain anything becomes. Were these stones graves? Calendars? Star charts? Apology notes to astral deer? Maybe all of the above. Human lives are messy. So are beliefs. Nothing says an ancient culture had to pick just one meaning per monument. Now let's bring in the skeptics. Because yes, they exist. Some scholars argue that any alignment is a coincidence. That the carvings are just decorative. That the whole Orion thing is confirmation bias. You want to see a pattern, so you do. And to be fair, they have a point. Humans love patterns. We see faces in clouds, animals in constellations, and conspiracy theories in fast food menus, but out here, surrounded by wind, grass, and sky, it's hard to shake the sense of intention. These stones weren't cheap to make. They weren't whipped up in an afternoon. Each one likely required a small team, a lot of effort, and more than a few sore backs. You don't go to that much trouble unless it matters. And that brings you back to Orion. Across cultures, that constellation has long been associated with hunters, warriors, and powerful cosmic beings. In Egypt, it was linked to Osiris. In ancient Greece, Orion was a literal hunter. And here, maybe, just maybe, those 3 stars weren't just dots, they were goals. Destinations. The final leap, you stand again, brushing dirt from your knees. The deer stone beside you catches the sun just right, casting a shadow that seems to point straight across the steppe. You follow it with your eyes. There's nothing out there. Just land, wind, and sky. And yet, it doesn't feel empty. It feels like something is watching. Waiting, not in a creepy way. More like patient curiosity. The kind that comes from something very old and very quiet, asking, "Are you paying attention yet?" You are now.